Hey Rebels, today I'm sitting down with a familiar voice, Sam Maciag. You might remember her from News Talk or CBC, covering local news, telling local stories, digging deep, and kind of helping us know what the things we need to know to get through the day. But it's not just the big stories of the day. If you're a news junkie, you know what's happened before 6 p.m. On television, print, on the web, they've had to pivot and offer more analysis and dig into the experts and examine the social impact of stories happening every day. Because when you have Twitter, it's instantaneous news. So what is the value that you get out of watching TV at 6 p.m.? It's that context. It's that extra little nugget. That's the value to you as a consumer and making you a more informed citizen. CBC recently announced Sam will be the host of CBC Saskatchewan News at 6. It's going to be beaming into your homes nightly, or in my case, on my mobile device. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
How's your day going?
It's going really well, actually. It's summer, right? So it's warm, and I like it when it's warm. It's funny, I'm born and raised in Regina. I've lived here my whole life, and I ask every winter when we hit those like super cold days, why do I still live here? But it's home. It's always been home. So yeah, and anytime it's hot and it's summery, I'm happy.
Well, you know what makes it really, really easy to live here? Good craft beer.
Yes. Yeah.
Have you ever had our Cerveza before?
No, this is the first time for me.
Okay, let's give her a try. Cheers.
Cheers. That's a good summer beer. You gonna tell me about it?
Well, first, I want you to tell me what you think. I don't want to prejudice your feedback.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I like that it's a lighter beer. Mm-hmm. I like that it doesn't have a really, really strong aftertaste. Because I find sometimes with these kinds of beers, you get that weird, I don't want to call it a skunky aftertaste, but it doesn't have that like skunky aftertaste. It's just like smooth, light, good patio summer drinking beer. Would also probably be really good with some lime slush in it.
There is lime in it.
Okay, then that would just add, it would just make it extra super foamy, frothy cold.
My aunt was telling me that Cerveza's her favorite beer, but then I go over to her house and I watch her and she's shoving lime wedges in it, and I'm like, there's already lime.
Yeah, I can taste that, yeah.
She just wants more.
Or maybe tequila.
So for this one, Cerveza, we launched it this summer, brand new beer, 4.2%, low ABV, and basically we wanted to say this is for the beach, this is for the patio. It's really, really hot weather. You want something easy and accessible, and we solve the skunking problem because we don't put our beer in clear glass bottles.
That's literally what causes it? That's the issue?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
When hops are exposed to sunlight, they create the same chemical reaction as a skunk's butt.
So it's not my imagination.
You're literally drinking the same chemicals that are found in a skunk's butt when you drink, they call it light struck beer.
Okay.
Yeah. Like if I took this glass, I put it on my patio for like 5-10 minutes and then I brought it inside, I could definitely smell
it would have that
taste.
aftertaste.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
It comes on quick. It happens almost immediately.
Oh, that's interesting. So if you're drinking it on a patio, it needs its own umbrella.
That's true. Or you don't want it to sit for more than 15-20 minutes.
Oh, that's a nice little marketing ploy you've got going on there as well then.
Well, the psychology of beer drinking shows that the average person consumes one drink every 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. Then I'm slow.
That's also part of the appreciation of beer. I'm a slow beer drinker. I will actually savor and drag out a beer for like half an hour, 40 minutes, especially if I'm watching a show or eating supper. I'm not going to just slam it. This is maybe something you can drink a little bit quicker.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah, like that light summer, easy summer drinking beer, for sure.
Would you recommend it to your friends?
Yes. Yes, I would. I may even take some home with me.
You should. I'll send you home with something. Right? So tell me about the CBC thing. How did that happen?
Well, the CBC thing has been a really interesting journey for me. As I said, I grew up in Regina, and I grew up watching CTV. We were a CTV family. Johnny Sandison, Alec Jocking, Tara Robinson. It's interesting, like through my career, coming to know some of these people as colleagues too has been really interesting and strange as an adult, watching the people that you grew up watching on TV as a kid. And I always wanted to work in the news as a kid. And I blame my grandma for it. She's now gone, but she always used to be the person to be like, did you know they say, or they claim, or whatever. Like, we always had to watch the news at 6. My grandma always watched the news at 11. Like, news was the way we structured a lot of our day in our family. It was important. My parents still read the paper every morning. And even getting into journalism school, I got distracted by an English 100 class and ended up doing an English and Religious Studies degree, even though I was in pre-journalism. Did that, came back, and then worked at Rolco for 10 years. Started out as a board op, working evenings and weekends on shows that don't even exist anymore. It was such a long time ago.
When you were in journalism school, did you know you wanted to be in radio or TV?
No. So here's what's interesting. The very week I got accepted into journalism school, I was actually offered a full-time producing job for a program that doesn't exist anymore in the afternoons on News Talk. And I had to decide, am I going to take this full-time producing job and work my way up, or do I want to go to journalism school? And I sat down with the head of the journalism school at the time, and he said to me, I'm not going to make this decision for you, but you need to decide if you want to work in radio forever, because you're going to have to work your way up. And if you don't necessarily have the same foundation that you're going to have if you have your degree. He's like, but maybe you just want to work in radio. Maybe you really love radio. But he's like, you need to figure out almost like what you want to do with the rest of your life in this next 24 hours. So I turned down the producing job. I went to journalism school, and then I ended up doing a double internship at the Leader Post and then staying on as a freelancer there for my internship. So I got to know the newspaper industry really well. Had to take some time away from Rolco, a couple months away. I did both jobs for a while, and then realized it was a bit of a conflict working in two newsrooms, like, because I was a producer in one and a reporter in the other, so the jobs weren't the same. But when you're competing for news, it wasn't working great.
That's really funny that you say that, because I did the same thing when I was at CTV.
Yeah.
I was part-time casual there and freelancing for Leader Post. So I'd be walking into the CTV newsroom, and Manfred Jonak would put the paper down and be like, why the hell is your name on a byline? Gotta pay the bills.
So uncomfortable. So
you're crossing, you're deciding that this is a conflict of interest.
Yes, so took some time away. I don't know, I can't remember if I decided or if the news director decided, but either way, I wasn't producing at Rolco for a while, and then ended up finishing my internship and everything, and then ended up going back part-time producing, working evenings and weekends. Like, being a board op evenings and weekends is a wicked good job when you're in university, even if you're not interested in the news world, because it's something that really, you can work weird hours, but it doesn't take a lot out of you. Like, a lot out of you, like, physically, so you can still do your, like, homework and stuff. And then from there, I remember my last week of journalism school, I was going to Toronto to visit my cousin, and the news director at CJME said, we should sit down and talk about, like, what your options are. And I was like, okay, I'll come in after school. I was in a hoodie. I was in jeans. I never gave him a resume. He didn't know I already had a degree. And after 45 minutes, he said, oh, I'm talking too much. This is your interview. And I was like, this is an interview? Like, not dressed appropriately or anything, but I'd worked there for a while already. And so they offered me a summer position initially. And then that was in April. And by July, I was a permanent reporter. And then I worked evenings and weekends as an anchor for a few years. And then they moved me to mornings. And I'll never forget when they moved me to mornings, because it was, let's try it for 3 weeks. And if you hate it, I'll move you back. Well, I was working 3 to 11 prior to that, like 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. So moving me to 4 a.m. to like noon felt real mean. Like, I was not a morning person. But I did it for 3 weeks and found I actually really liked it.
So let's back up a sec. For people who don't know, what the hell is a board op? What do they do?
The person that pushes all the buttons. So literally, even if you've watched on TV in a movie, it's literally the person that looks like they're sitting behind a nuclear reactor. It's got all of the red and green buttons and yellow buttons and all the sliders, and you're literally just turning microphones and audio elements on and off. It doesn't sound complicated, but you are literally the person that is keeping the radio station on the rails. So it's a very important, very, very important job. And they're who make people sound good too, changing volumes, listening to audio levels and stuff like that. So it's a job that doesn't get the credit I think it's often due, because there is a lot of responsibility that comes with being that person. So yeah, going back, they moved me to mornings. I backed up Alec Docking on mornings for a while. They launched a new morning show on CJME. 3 months in, that host didn't work out, and they asked me to start filling in for her. And I was the morning reporter at the time, so I just moved into that role I was reading the news. I was actually the morning anchor then. And then they did another shuffle, and I became as an anchor, I was kind of the co-host, and then the show kind of became all of us. And it ebbed and flowed over the years, and I had all these different co-hosts, and then that was years. I did that for years. And then last June on the 20th.
Your voice sounds different now than it
does.
did in the beginning. Is that because you changed your settings or because you found a radio voice?
I found a radio voice. It's funny, I listened back to the tapes I did. I remember my very first newscast at CJME. It was at night. They were just like, do it later. You'll be fine. But they're like, not as many people listening. And I remember as soon as the moment was over, when it was done, I went, oh my God, I'm gonna have a heart attack. My mic was still on. Like the board, everything was still on, so everyone could hear over the sting out, like the music that you hear, like that's a promo for whatever's coming next. You could hear me like deep breathe my fear everywhere, and my phone lit up like, turn off your microphone. But yeah, I was able to find pacing and tone, and it's funny because originally I didn't have enough. Like it was, you need to smile more, people can hear when you're smiling, and then it was, you need to slow down. I'm a notoriously fast talker. And then it was just finding my own voice, and like working at Rolco, I had a much more, it's hard to describe it. It's more of a private broadcasting sound. It's a little more energetic. It's a little, I don't want to say cheesy because that's a mean word, but it is a little more pumped up.
Yep.
And I've found since moving to CBC, my voice is softer. I'm not as,
You're
it's
not
not
inflecting as much?
No, which is kind of nice because it's also a lot easier on your voice. Yeah, and then last June they just decided that they were going to go in a different direction. Not my decision. Did not see it coming, like not even for a second. And then I spent last summer figuring out, where do I want to work? And that was actually a really interesting thing for me because one, when you get let go from a job, everyone will tell you they've also been fired, which in the moment is not helpful. And I wish more people would realize that. I know that they're trying to like relate to you, like, I got let go and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, that's great for you, but I'm still in it. I'm not on the other side yet. And so if I could offer people advice, it would be, please don't tell me about the time you got fired. I don't need, like, it is really not helpful. But also it was an opportunity to also almost interview people about where I wanted to work. Like, what do you want to do? You've just been doing this for so long that it's your job. What do you want to do? So I actually spent the summer meeting with like different newsrooms and figuring out, like, do I want to go into communications? Am I ready to give up the breaking news element? Do I want to move into a different kind of role? Like, what do I want to do? And that was way more stressful than I thought it was going to be. And ended up, I had multiple meetings with CBC, and the management team at CBC is amazing. Like, they are just the nicest, most genuine, helpful, supportive people. And it's not that the other newsrooms weren't. It's that it was so above and beyond that I almost felt like swayed by it. And so I went to CBC as a casual, which felt like a risk, because it is federally funded and you don't know if you're going to have a job. But I mean, to be fair, I'd already lost one once. So, I mean, you could go through it again if you had to. And so I went in as a casual, and I worked on the morning edition as an associate producer for 6 weeks right off the top. And it was great to just get in with an established team.
Right in the fire.
And to just work with people, the same people almost every day, and work on features and stuff. I remember one of my first longer form features was the coldest day ever. We went out to a farm and we did a story on a donkey and a horse that were like best friends.
Festus came around the barn and he kind of looked at her, and she backed up because she had never seen a donkey before, and he said, hi, I'm a nice guy to know. He's quite a handsome brute. And they sniffed as animals do, and they've been together ever since.
And it turned into this great story, and CBC Kids did stuff with it, and it was such a Saskatchewan story.
I remember that story.
And it was super, super fun. Festus and Penny, I think, were the names of the donkey and the horse. Anyways, but it was like doing all this different stuff and meeting different people and kind of working the connections that I still have in the community. And then I worked as a web writer and I worked as a news reader, and then I'd fill in on Blue Sky and I'd work on Afternoon Edition. And TV, I had learned a little bit on how to write stories and stuff, but I hadn't touched a camera since journalism school. Like, it had been 10 years, and I was like, nah, I don't know. And they had kind of approached me on like, would you like to learn how to host? And when they asked me, I remember the meeting vividly. It was in January, and they said, would you like to learn? And I was like, okay. But in my head, think of that like Danny DeVito fast shaking head. Nope. That's what was happening in my head. I was like, nope, nope, nope. I had never in my entire career wanted to work in television ever. Like, did not want to be on TV, did not take advanced broadcast in university, like did not want to work in broadcasting. So hilarious that I did 10 years of radio before I even got to this point. And I said, you know what? They said, a host is a host, Sam. Like, you're a great host. Let us see if we can teach you how to be a TV host. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. I will try it. And it was much like the morning show when they were like, we're going to move you to mornings. And so I tried it, and I'll never forget the first night. Dan Plaster and Jenna Leith were training me, and I was working, just learning to read the 11 o'clock. It's a 10-minute newscast, so it's a little bit shorter, a little less stressy. And I wasn't actually on the air. It was just learning to manage time and learning how to write for TV. And so I wrote the newscast, and Dan looked at me and he said, okay, go read it. And I said, pardon? And he said, get on the set and read it. And I was like, I've been doing this for exactly 2 hours. What do you mean? And he's like, you know how to do this. Go stand. And so they taught me how to work the prompter. And it was so uncomfortable because I didn't know where to look. I didn't know what to do with my hands, but my voice was fine. So if you listen to the news, if they would have aired that night, you would have been like, oh, that's Sam. It's fine. But watching me would have been painful because it looked like I was ready to play a grand piano, because I was gripping the desk so hard because I didn't want to talk with my hands because I'm a hand talker. And I felt afraid to move my head because I don't know what I thought was going to happen. It's not like my head's going to snap off and roll across the floor, but I didn't know what to do. It was so uncomfortable, and it got better and it got better. And then I hosted a couple evening shows, and then Zarka announced she was leaving. And they
Zarka Nawaz.
Nawaz, yeah, Zarka Nawaz announced that she was leaving. She was the previous host. And they said, we're going to get you to backfill. Like, we're going to have you backfill the TV job for now until the job is posted and we can get through all the paperwork, because there is, being like a unionized environment, there is a lot of different steps they have to go through to get a job posted and go through the interviews and everything else. And so I was like, okay. And so I've been doing that since April the 8th. And then I went through the interview process over summer, and then the job eventually became mine. And now the girl who never, ever wanted to work in television hosts a TV program. All because I said I would try it. And all because I'd like good support too. Like, people, and I mean, that's how you know you have good managers too, where they see something maybe in you that you don't see in yourself. So
let's back it up a bit, because you said something that kind of made me laugh a little bit, with your head rolling off and you didn't know what to do with your hands. Kind of reminds me of Will Ferrell, where he's like lifting his hand up. He's like, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
Be good just to hold them down by your side. Yeah, great.
And I've had that moment of terror where I'm in front of the camera, but maybe not quite as focused to, say, a host. Mm-hmm. Like, great job. You just screwed up in front of 120,000 people, and then your heart just drops.
You know, it's interesting because I don't think about it like that, and I never did on the radio either. I never thought about how many people were listening. I would think about a few people who were listening. Like, I would think about, like, I know my parents would listen every day, and I'd think of friends that would listen every day, and there's certain people who would text in every day. TV's a little different because I don't have that immediate feedback with people the way I did on the radio show, but I don't think about it as, like, maybe the premier or the queen or the prime minister or someone important is watching. But those people, in the grand scheme of putting on a show, are not any different than the school teacher or the construction worker or you or I watching. So for me, I try really hard. Names are the hardest thing for me. I really don't want to screw up somebody's name because I know how many times my name has been butchered over the years. That's just the product of having a Polish last name that's spelled like a Scottish last name with the vowels and consonants that don't make sense. But yeah, it actually doesn't, it bothers me, but it doesn't when I make a mistake, because also it's one of those cases of most people don't notice. Like, you notice it when you flub up a word, but like having normal conversation, when you flub up a word in conversation, nobody notices. Unless you say something like really ridiculous and then you all laugh and move on. But I haven't really had that instance. I do find, though, I make more mistakes when I turn into turbo reader, when I start talking too fast and fall into like standard Sam speed language. But if I slow it down, then I'm usually okay, because you can see the words as they come on the prompter.
So what stories or issues do you like to chase the most? For me, it was always like politics. If it was a political story, I wanted in. But if it was like a football story, I wanted to run away.
It's funny because Adam Hunter does such a good job with politics. I have no desire to step on his territory. He is good. That is his. No thanks. I love having it in the show, because I think in this province there are kind of three things that get people really excited. One is politics, one is the weather, and the other is the riders. Those three things, if you typically have them in a day, you've got people watching because they're interested in kind of how things are going through the day.
I hate the weather on the news. As soon as the weather's on, I'm like, oh God, end this. I've got
No.
an app that tells me what the weather is.
See, but I still really see the value in weather, because I think for me, it's not so much watching the weather, it's like hearing it. Because we say the weather every single day, and there are still days where I am surprised when I get up in the morning and I'm like, hey, it's cloudy. And then I'll get to work and Christy will be like, I literally told you it was going to be cloudy last night. But it's like, you almost like, for us, it's almost like wallpaper. We don't notice it as much. But it's how you get your kids ready for school in the morning. It's all those things. So if you're listening or you're watching, it at least sticks in your head. You have to check your app. But if you're watching the news and you hear us say there's going to be a blizzard tomorrow, that's the difference between if you put your kids in snow pants and proper clothing or if you don't, right? So those things, like, they matter more than you think, probably more than people think they do. Stories wise, I love anything arts and entertainment. Like, those things, I've always been drawn to them. So it's an easy, I love doing.
Comedians.
Yeah, I like doing those just because I once upon a time worked at the Connexus Art Center also. So I've had some like work in that between working in news and entertainment. They're normal people. And so for me, I just like knowing the things that make them tick, the things that make them normal human beings. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about the things that you do day to day that aren't on the stage, because that's what makes people interesting. The things they do on stage is their job, right? And I mean, if they're doing their job right, you almost don't notice that they're a person because it's a performance, it's an entertainment, but there's somebody behind that. So for me, I like getting to know people and that kind of stuff. I do love sports. I grew up playing basketball and football, so I really do like following sports and getting to know athletes.
Here's a good one for you. Mm-hmm. Someone comments on a story that's posted online, on social media. Mm-hmm. Are you allowed to comment, or do you wisely stay out of it because you're above that kind of the rabble? Or do you like getting? Do you like the cut and thrust? Do you want to get in there?
No. Okay. Here's the thing. There's a difference between someone with a legitimate question or concern and someone who's being a troll, and you can tell the difference very, very easily. Just based on how they phrase a question, right? Like, why is it this way? You can tell if someone hasn't read the article based on the question they've asked. I typically try not to get involved in sparring matches with people. If it's a factual thing where someone calls me out and they say I'm wrong and I know I'm not, I'll fight back every time, because part of that is like a teeny piece in me that likes to be right. My best friend would completely be like, she's listened to me get into some really stupid arguments, like just over beer, like not even like social media arguments, but you get into the personality conflicts where you got two people that won't back down and Google's out and it turns into a really ugly conversation where eventually you just have to be like, just let it go. But when it comes to social media and people I don't know, I don't want to get pulled into something that I can't back my way out of. So typically I'll ignore it. Facebook, I always ignore. My own personal Facebook page, if someone says something dumb, I'll typically like delete it and call them out like in a personal private message, so I don't need to
You'll
drag
delete their message?
Sometimes I will, yeah. If it's on my like personal page, yeah, I've deleted stuff before where I'm just like, no, because in a lot of cases they're going to draw other people into a stupid argument, and then this whole stupid thing unfolds on your own personal Facebook page that you have no control over. So if I can see that coming from a mile away, I'm like, nope, not today. I will mom the heck out of this. I am not, no. Yeah, so I've removed before. I mean, I don't get into politics on my Facebook page, so it's not hard for me to remove those things because I'm just like, no, this is not my job. Like, it's not my job to get politically invested in anything. It's my job to be like, this is what's going on. These are the questions I'm asking of people. You can make your own conclusions, right? So I don't pick a side.
Well, how do you feel when people accuse you of being biased or having picked a side when you yourself believe you have not?
It's hard. Having bias in the news is harder. Not having bias, I guess. Having bias, not having bias is harder than ever because of Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump has made our job infinitely more difficult because all someone has to say to you is fake news. And it's so hard to defend against that because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you hit them with factually. That's all they have to say. And it's almost like argument over. Like, there's no coming back from that. And it's really hard to convince people in this day and age that just because you don't like something doesn't make it not true. And so for me, that's been the hardest thing. Having bias one way or another. I mean, we all have our own personal like morals and stuff like that. But when it comes to the end of the day, I ask all people kind of the same questions. So if the NDP is in government, if the Sask Party is in government, if the Liberals are in government, if the Conservatives are in government, we ask them all the same, we hold them all to the same account. So it might look like we are favoring the opposition because we're trying to hold the government to account, but it's just because we're trying to hold them to account. If the opposition became the government, they'd get asked the same questions. So I think that's hard for people to understand too because it's in cycles, right? So people don't have the same institutional long-term government memory that we have to, right? So if you come in and suddenly now you pay attention to the news and you haven't since you know, or maybe never have, and you're like, oh, she's always grilling him about this and it's not fair and blah, blah, blah. But if you'd stick around for another government, you'd see people grilling them the same way, different government. So it's just a matter of like, it's hard when people bop in and out of the news.
I was having an argument last week with someone because they were saying, people don't know who John A. Macdonald is. They don't care. That the significance of having his statue or not, or whether it got defaced, they don't know who he is, so it's meaningless. They didn't know who Gabriel Dumont or Louis Riel was, and saying to the broader general public, well, in this instance of the discussion, they were applying hyper-skepticism, a radical skepticism, where they said, how do you know anything's true? Because it could all be made up. And I'm like, that's not how this works. You can't function.
How do you know anything is true? For me, that's right up there with fake news. Like you're dragging me into an argument that I can't win. So that's when you lose me.
So I got to the point where I was like talking about primary, secondary sources and like reflective evidence, and they're just like, well, you're just wrong because people are stupid and they'll never know. I'm just like, Christ, I've got more hope than that for people.
Well, I think part of it too is that we can't assume that people don't know. But we also can't assume that people do know. And so sometimes people will accuse journalists of almost like babying the public with the information they're giving them. Like, I know who John A. Macdonald is. But to your point, there is people who don't. There are people.
There are people.
There are people.
Yeah.
Grammar is hard.
You caught it.
But there's a faction of people that also may not care. And that also makes our job really hard because sometimes when stories come up, we're like, this matters, but you can't make people care about a story. You can give them the information and hope that they understand why something's important and what the ramifications might be down the road. But you can't say this is important because then the whole bias thing comes out too, right? So it's one of those, like, we do our best to give the information and hope that people are informed enough, care enough to make their own conclusions.
I will give a shout out to Murray Mandrick, because once upon a time when I was just a lowly intern with no knowledge, he fed me a few questions and he said, be sure to ask this politician these questions.
Right.
And then bring those answers back to me. And I didn't understand the context. I didn't understand what the answers were. The politician answered them, and I'm like, what is this all about? And he's like, oh, this happened like 15 years ago with the Ministry of Education, blah, blah, blah. And he gave me all that background. But at the time, I was completely blind. Like,
right.
Flying through the fog with no
institutional knowledge, right?
Had none of it. And then once I got caught back up, I was like, oh, this is why this question matters. And part of me felt dumb. Part of me is just like, I'm I'm in my 20s. I just haven't.
I'm sure that politician was like, why do you know about this?
She really gave me a weird look. She's like, her head kind of did that tweak thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a weird moment, but thanks to Murray, I was able to. So what you just said reminded me of that moment, that institutional knowledge.
Yeah, and it's hard because it's not something that you can just, I mean, you can study it, but there's also nuances. And I think that's one of the reasons I didn't leave when I left CJ. I mean, one of the first questions people said to me was, are you leave? Like, where are you moving to? What are you going to do? And I had job offers in quite a few different cities, but for me, this is home. Like, my brother lives in Kelowna with my nephew and his girlfriend, and like they're there. My family's here. I'm like an unofficial aunt to so many kids here. For me, it was just, I've learned that there's so much after, like your job isn't just your life, that there's so much more to your life than your job. And so I wanted to stay and I wanted to be here, but also part of it was I didn't, after all this time, want to move into a new city and have to learn new political system, who all the politicians are, what their faces are. Like, knowing names and knowing faces is two totally different things. And then building those relationships, because a lot of our job too is built on trust. And that people can come to us with story tips, or they can come to us letting us know that something's going to happen before it happens so we can prepare for it. Like, those things happen. And we don't have the luxury of that. If people don't know who you are, they don't trust you. So the fact that I knew,
you should maybe think about being at the courthouse at this date, at this time. There's nothing happening, but maybe you should be there with a camera.
Yeah, like just having, or, you know, this report's coming out, or this and this is happening. And those things happen because people trust you. And it's hard to get the trust of people if they don't know you. So for me, I felt like I have a lot of those relationships, and I don't want to say like squander them, but they do mean a lot to me. Like, it wasn't just a personal, professional, like, gain thing. It's like some of these people have become acquaintances out of work that, like, you know, they're good people. I wasn't just using them for personal gain, professional gain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That can be taken really out of context, but anyway.
So you're not even concerned about taking on full time this 6 o'clock piece. Like, you are ready to run with it full speed.
Yeah, it's funny. It was like a progression. At first, I was like, I don't know if this is for me, and then the more I did it, the more, like, a host really is a host. Like, once you've hosted something, you kind of, it's just learning a new medium. And it's been cool too. It's almost like going back to school in a way, because it forced me to use my brain a little bit differently. Like, how you write stories and stuff for television is so different. I can say, like, this park where this happened, and that park just whoop appears. I don't have to describe the park. I don't, you know, it's, so just having a different, thinking about things differently, using pictures differently, doing interviews differently, trying to make them visually interesting, finding a location that's nice, where you're not going to get rained on, where the wind isn't going to blow my hair into my face the entire time so you can't see me on camera, like, things that I never used to have to think about. And then there's the whole hair and makeup thing, which, like, not that I was a hobo before, where I looked like I hadn't, like, showered in days or anything, but now it's like I have to tame my hair every day, curl it, straighten it, put a full face of makeup. So life's just different. It's good, but it's different. Things that you may not have to experience.
I do remember having had to powder my head because I'm a bald guy. Because it would just be, like, shiny. Because the studio was so hot, the lights were just cooking you.
Yeah, it's warm. It's warm on set.
People, I don't know if they still do this, but at the time at CTV, the studio lights were so hot, but the air conditioning was really, really loud and would pick up on the news. So we had to turn the air conditioning off.
Oh no.
Then on the commercial breaks, because I was running the camera, I would run over, turn off all the studio lights, and then turn on the air conditioning and it would suck all the hot air out of the room and cool it down substantially just to save the host.
That's nice of you.
And then turn it back off, and they'd be like 10 seconds, and all the lights would come back up, and I'd be back behind the camera.
Yeah, no, we're all LEDs, so it's not super, super hot, but if you're not feeling super great, it feels really hot. You're not having a great day.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
So what do you do with your hands when you're on TV?
Now they just kind of sit on the desk. I move them around. It's so funny because learning to figure out my hands, I remember they gave me paper. the first thing they did was hold on to paper, like just in one hand. But I was holding the paper so tight, not out of nerves, but just so tightly that it was shaking.
Yeah.
Because it was another, like, don't know what to do with my hands. And then Dan said, let's get you a pen. So then I held a pen for a while, and that calmed me down. And now I'm to the point where I'm comfortable enough on camera that I move my hands here and there. I'll lift them up when I need to. I move my papers when I need to. But it's not a performance thing anymore. It's just, I just do what I do, and I don't even notice my hands. I guarantee I will notice my hands tonight, though.
I want to thank you for coming on the show, Sam.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the beer.
Cheers. Rebels, in case you didn't know, we're now an affiliate member of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. If you're into podcasts or you're looking for great content produced right here in our province, the Sask Podcast Network is a great one-stop shop to discover local stories to listen to. I'm going to include links in the show notes so you can find Sam on social media. That's including Twitter and Facebook and all that fun stuff. Be sure to check her out on CBC News at 6, or Saskatchewan. Sorry, how did I say it again?
CBC Saskatchewan News at 6.
There we go. Be sure to check her out and just shoot her a message. Just let her know that you heard her on the podcast and check if she does anything weird with her hands.
I guarantee I will.
As always, if you want to find the latest news about Rebellion Brewing, be sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or Untapped. Untapped is like Facebook for beer. Thank you for joining the Rebellion.